Welcome to BAMA Contemporary Art, where we are currently hosting our latest artist, Mr. David Chevtaikin. The title of the show is Initiating the Shaman. And it's the lecture revolves around the arc of the cosmos, abstraction, and the work of David Chevtaikin. A little round of applause for David and all his work. In David's pieces, we will find similar same thing. We have the shaman mask in here, along with the body. So the title of this piece is Two Soul. It's the same thing. Look at the color field. Look at the shapes that are embedded in the background. Look at what happens. There's a movement from right to left, moving through the piece. And you could see that what David is doing is literally trancing into a different state. As you can see here in this piece, David creates a color field like Rothko does. So David understands the idea of trancing through a mist-like state, because once you're in a mist-like state, you wind up not having any bearing. So in order for you to lose yourself and in order to come back effectively, you have to free fall. You have to essentially be bearingless. So what winds up happening is the shaman is transported to another world in which there is no time or space. There is no up or down. Notice how the Stuart Davis pieces seemingly had an up and down, but then they didn't. So he's an intermediary in a different way. David is starting to experiment with the window idea, the doorway idea to trance work, and essentially he creates the ship, in which that ship is headed to the sun, the green light. In Arthurian times, the green knight, the green destiny sword of the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, the green sword of the Hobbit, recent movie out. The idea of green is renewal. Notice how the snake, notice how renewal is huge in early ancient lore, and how renewal was also attached to death and new vision. So what happens is you have the ship floating through, and then you have a figure here, it's seemingly, and that figure is sacrificial, laying across the hull. Interestingly enough, I gave you guys a handout of a poem by Seamus Heaney, Nobel Prize winning poet in the 90s, Irish poet, uses a lot of this symbology. He completely understands what's going on. And as you can see here, the cross mast, the ship is transport vessel. Notice the vessels we saw in Twombly, Egyptian time. These are all symbols that are happening. We could see it again in Dave. And the poem that I wanted to read was The Settle Bed. And this is interesting because the bed, as a metaphor, acts not only as a transport vessel, but it also is where a lot of human activity takes place. The dream world happens in the bed. Sexual intercourse happens in the bed. Things happen between parents in the bedroom about how they raise their children. Discussions, private moments. So the bed is really the deathbed, but it's also the life bed, and it works as a transport. So this is The Settle Bed by Seamus Heaney. Will down, waited for, in place at last, and for good. Trunk hasped, cart heavy, painted in ignorant brown. And pew straight, pin deeped, standing 4 square as an ark. If I lie in it, I am cribbed in seasonal deal, dry as the unkindled boards of a funeral ship. My measure has been taken, my ear shuttered up. Yet I hear an old somber tide awash in the headboard. Unpathetic ox and hose, the long bedtime anthems of Ulster, unwilling, unbeaten. Protestant, Catholic, the Bible, the beads, long talks at gables by moonlight, boots on the hearth. The small hours chime sweetly away, so next thing it was the clock ringing on the ridge tiles. And now this is an inheritance, upright, rudimentary, unshiftably planked, in the long ago, yet unwillable forward. Again and again and again, cargoed with its own dumb tongue and groove worthiness, an unget-roundable weight. But to conquer that weight, imagine a dower of settle beds tumbled from heaven, like some nonsensical vengeance on the people, then learned from that harmless barrage that whatever is given can always be reimagined, however foursquare, plank thick, hull stupid, and out of its time it happens to be. You are free as the lookout, that far-seeing joker posted high over the fog, who declared by the time that he had gotten himself down, the actual ship had been stolen away beneath him. Although it was very poignant and how it really related to this piece, because it is the vision that goes forward and is renewed again, again, and again. This is what's happening with the artist and the psyche for particular artists in general. What's interesting is what happens. The challenge is for the shaman energy to transport itself through, the calling of the artist to answer to it. What does that artist bring back? Do they have the courage to stand in the unknown, the true unknown? Not the unknown with the history behind them, but the unknown where it is completely raw. And what vision do they bring back for them? So in this piece, we see the same sort of symbols happening. What David's brought back is the cross image that's largely happening here, the circles around and around. He has large swathing areas. This is much more of an abstract leaning piece than anything than not, but we could still see the notion of these basic shapes and images that are happening. You can see it in here. You can also see it if you look to your left on the piece over here, Art Not Food, the cross happening, the sphere happening, the transport. Notice the empty bottom on the right-hand side of the page, the floating seemingly orbs in space. Very connected to the cosmos. Here is a close-up. Now, unfortunately, this came out pretty bad. Didn't do what I wanted to do. This is a piece that's in the window. You can't really tell, but right here you have the circle and the cross. Notice we went all the way back to the beginning of the lecture where we saw that image. That image is carried out. That's how you know you're at the precipice of having a vision. Usually it is done with this notion of compass bearing and the cross within the sphere and the circle. We are not out of the realm of that with our Christian heritage. This is Soul Child. This piece here, stripped down to the bare bones, sacrificed across the transepts in a cross-like symbol. Notice the words that are written on these pieces. Very similar to Basquiat. Dave's struggling with where his urban spiritual life is situated in this urban environment. Can the city house the new oracle? That's the question. That's the challenge that happens. We see this again with the Jesus symbol. The sphere. This is a Dora painting of Christ holding the globe and the sphere. This is a painting by Da Vinci. Notice there's a slight cross imbued in here. You see that? Inside the sphere. Here's the sphere itself. Translucent. So what's happening here metaphorically is that the globe, the star, the cosmos in which we live in is right here. It's not colored in. It's not some globe. It's not some object. You can see through it. It's transported. In other words, are you willing to be transported in the real now, what's happening, to the spirit realm? Do you have the courage to do that? You don't have to, but it is here. It's happening now. This is what Da Vinci understands. He understands that the spirit world exists right now in the palm of your hand. That's why it's translucent. Of course, we have the burning heart, the cross in the heart. Notice this, what's happening inside here. This is the major guilt Jesus picture of every Italian household. So what happens, you have the burning heart, the passion heart. You have the heart that's on fire, that is alive, the exploding heart. Notice what happens in the nebulae, all the way at the back of the beginning of the lecture. Notice what happens with the starburst, the shapes of the star. You have the Christ that touches it. In order for you to be part of heaven, you have to touch your heart here on earth. It's not up there in the sky, although behind him you do see the nimbus that does reflect the star. And of course, we go back to Matisse. Jazz, 1940. Very interesting fact. Jazz does root itself from the term jasm or jism, which means spirit or spunk, if you haven't noticed where we're going with this. So it's very interesting that the music that has a very spontaneous, riff-like feel gets depicted by Matisse through a sacrificial figure with a burning heart. Notice the cave figure at the very beginning of the lecture had the open heart into it. So this is part of the human experience. Same thing with the star mass. This figure is floating in space or lying down or being lifted. Very different ways to eradicate the bearing of space. How do you eliminate bearing? And if you're really cool, you know when to look out for the chicks. So we could see Dave's pace. We bring it right back to the cave. We could see this figure also is a figure, but yet takes off to another figure. Or has a headdress on. So what happens here is the dance in Sundance, rightfully titled, by the way, winds up reflecting exactly what was taking place 40, 50,000 years ago. So Dave, do you have the courage to bring back the new vision? That's the question for you.